Welcome into Walker Talks Radio on a Tuesday afternoon at 3 o'clock. If you are listening live, I appreciate it. I'm curious about what you're doing for a job, though, if you're able to listen to a YouTube live interview at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But I do appreciate you joining us if you are listening live. As always, we are sponsored by one of the 15 best dive bars in the state of Tennessee, the Downtown Tavern in downtown Jackson, Tennessee. If you are ever around downtown Jackson on a weeknight or a weekend, stop into the tavern. It is truly an original place, a cornerstone of downtown Jackson. And if you've ever been through Jackson or you live in Jackson, you know downtown is on the upswing. A lot of new businesses, new restaurants are coming into downtown Jackson. The tavern's been there the longest, kind of a stalwart in the area. Stop by Downtown Tavern, Jackson, Tennessee, 208 North Liberty Street. They are open 7 days a week. Today, my guest is Stacy Preston. She is the Executive Director of All Saints Immigration Services. All Saints Immigration Services became a U.S. Department of Justice recognized organization in 2020, enabling staff to provide low-cost legal representation and advice to immigrant neighbors in West Tennessee. With the help and support of All Saints Anglican Church in Jackson, Tennessee, they opened their doors to their first client in November of 2020. Stacy Preston, as I said, is the Executive Director and a Department of Justice accredited representative. She has an undergraduate degree in Spanish and a Master of Arts in Intercultural Studies from Union University, and she is the founder of All Saints Immigration Services and has had a long history of being involved in the immigrant community. She is passionate about being an advocate for immigrant rights and community awareness of the immigrant experience. Stacy focuses on family-based immigration cases and adjustment of status. And before I kick it to you, Stacy, I want to thank you, first of all, for sitting down to have this important conversation. I think anytime we talk about these huge narratives like immigration, oftentimes the human element is lost in these discussions. And I think that during this time of year, with the presidential election coming up, immigration is a narrative that gets weaponized a lot, along with other narratives. Immigration is not the only one, but it is a big one that oftentimes is weaponized by one side or the other to try to get votes or to try and scare people into voting a certain way. And the human element gets lost. And so I hope throughout this conversation, we can really focus in on the humanity of what immigration is and the people that are actually living that life. So first of all, and I know this answer, I think, but I want people who are listening to this to find out a little bit about you. How did you end up as Executive Director of All Saints Immigration Services, and why in the world would you choose something so complex as immigration law to work in?
That's a really good question. Thanks for having me and just letting me talk about this. It's one of my favorite subjects to talk about. Began in 2017 kind of searching for what are my options to work with the immigrant population. It's something that I've always found interesting in college, through travel, study abroad, and different experiences. And just the experience of migration as a whole has always been fascinating to me, and have always wanted to somehow involve that in the work that I do. I've been in Jackson for a long time now, and that's very limited here. And so through my research and a Google search, I came across the opportunity through the Department of Justice to practice immigration law as a non-attorney. And that was very intriguing. And I knew from my past experiences, just within my own desire to learn Spanish and understand the immigrant community, I had just kind of immersed myself in those places that I could locally and then abroad as well. And through that, just began to learn about the immigration process. And I knew one of the most challenging and complex parts of the immigration system in the U.S. was navigating it and understanding how to get a legal status. What's the pathway to citizenship? And so the idea of being able to practice immigration law without going to law school for 4 years was very intriguing to me because I knew that was such a roadblock for a lot of the immigrants that I've met personally in the past, and how that determined their quality of life, their stability, and really the trajectory of their future. And so I began to explore this option with the local church that I'm a part of at All Saints Anglican Church, because you need the support of a nonprofit organization. And at the time, we were not our own C3, and we needed that support system to help us get started. And so they happily agreed to explore this and support us. And so that was in 2017. And after going through a long process of earning immigration law, taking CLE courses, job shadowing, taking tests, building up a resume. Finally, in 2020, we became accredited and were able to open our doors and serve clients that way. So that's a quick story about just how we got to this point and opening up a nonprofit that didn't exist and now exists. And now we're able to do that work. And that's how we're able to do that.
That's a long road. So prior to 2017, when you were personally interested in different cultures, and I don't want to assume, but I assume you didn't start with immigration at the top of your mind. It was maybe more about learning about different cultures. At what point were your eyes sort of open to the plight of the immigrant, especially the undocumented immigrant? Like, at what point in that process were you like, there's a lot here I didn't even know existed?
Yeah, I mean, it really began with just wanting to learn the language, and knew I was studying that in school, but it takes much more outside of that to really become immersed and fluent in that. So that's how it began. So in college, I just started attending a local Spanish speaking church to be able to hear and just practice and then get to know. And then in doing that, I started to really get to know people and families. And then it went from that to being a part of their birthdays and weddings and reading their mail for them and interpreting at doctor's office visits and explaining systems that they were not familiar with and how to navigate those. Then, as time went on, started becoming aware of the barriers to the things that they were asking me for help with, but not necessarily saying, "Hi, I'm undocumented," but realizing like, oh, your barrier to being able to do this is because you don't have a social security number, you don't have a valid driver's license, or those types of things. And then realizing that the access to be able to get that, or even the knowledge or the ability to speak English well enough to navigate these systems, they could not do that on their own without an advocate or a representative. And then just through experiences of friends that had had very challenging circumstances in their own immigration journey really made me aware of a lot of just even the injustice that existed, or lack of access or financial means, or just the law itself was limited in what was eligible for people to apply for to take that next step in their immigration. That would give them access to be able to get health insurance or a driver's license or a bank account, those types of things. So, yes.
Even for people who speak fluent English, the systems are really complicated to navigate sometimes, right? Like what you have to do to get a driver's license or a social security card. I can't imagine being in a brand new place, or even if it's not brand new, still not speaking the language and having any idea about how to go about those processes. Before you were sort of immersed in that world or started to help and get to know people, as humans, did you have any preconceived notions about immigrants or immigration in general, or was it just not on your radar much at all? And if it was, did it change once you got to know the
Yeah,
people?
I did. I think I thought, when I just started kind of immersing myself in this, I would think, why would somebody not have the right documents? Why would they not have the right papers? Like, just go get them, like, get the papers and just do it the right way. I think it was a lot of was what I thought it was. And I thought that that was just something that you could just do. The reality is, it's not that way. And as I begin to get into this work and really learning the law and the limitations to that and how the US immigration system functions, it is not like that. It's not just a wait line that you get into. You have to qualify for that wait line. You have to be eligible to get into that wait line. And it is a very long process, highly vetted. And that really takes an advocate to navigate for you. Even for an English speaker, we don't ever really say just go fill out these forms and mail them in, because what you mark on the forms, what you write on the forms, all has to be measured against what the law says. And so if you aren't familiar with the law and you're filling out forms on your own, that can cause a lot of problems. And so being able to advocate for somebody in that process was just an eye-opening that that's even needed. Yeah, in a dream world, that would be that attorneys, immigration attorneys and legal representatives, there wouldn't be a need for it because it would be understandable and easy to apply for and a way forward. But currently, it's incredibly hard to do without representation.
And let's talk specifically about some of the things that you all do with All Saints Immigration Services, because I do think there is a narrative out there, and we'll get into the larger narrative of immigration and how that's being used right now in culture, specifically in American culture. But I think there is just a general misunderstanding of how complicated and nuanced the process is of becoming a citizen, or what pathways are available, or how that even starts. I want to focus this right now in West Tennessee because that's where you have your experience. So for people who don't understand the process, me being one, let's say someone comes to your office and they say, hey, I'm here, I'm in West Tennessee, I crossed at the southern border, I had family here, I don't know if legal is the right word, I don't even know the exact vernacular to use here. What process do you all do from the very first contact with someone who is asking for your services?
Okay, so we focus on family-based immigration. So I'm going to back up a little bit and just give you a context that there's really three main ways to come to the US, and that's through a family member, through employment, or through the refugee system. So we don't work with employment, and refugees are brought over from another country. So they are assigned refugee status before they get here. So we don't work with bringing a refugee here. So they would already enter the country with that status.
Okay,
So,
can I stop you real quick right there? Okay,
yeah,
because
yeah.
this is something that's brand new to me too. I think when you hear refugees, there's this idea that people just cross the border and they're like, hey, now is asylum and refugee the same thing, or is that different?
Okay, so they meet the same definition of somebody that's being persecuted based on their race, religion, political opinion, social group. However, to qualify for asylum, you have to be physically present in the US. So you would have to come into the border, your feet physically in the US, and say, I want to claim asylum. For refugee status, that is processed through the United Nations. That's processed in normally a second country. So, like the country that they were escaping because of natural disasters, war, they apply for that status with a United Nations like employee. They are normally living at a refugee camp for many, many years. The United Nations assigns them a country that they were going to go to that accepts refugees to live in. Every year, the number of refugees is set by the president, so that can change each year. US has a number they'll allow in. They let that number in. After that number's filled, they don't accept new refugees for the next year that comes. So the refugee process is very different than the asylum process, although they meet the same definition, what they would be required, the standard to come into the country.
That makes sense, because I do think there is this idea out there that people are just rushing the border. And I'm not down there, I don't know. But there's people are rushing the border and they're like, asylum, I'm here, 2 feet in, whatever, and then like do something with me. But you all don't deal with it. You said, and I interrupted you, and I apologize for that.
No,
You all
that's
do family-based
So
immigration.
yes, so that takes out, we currently don't process, any employment, that's done through an employer. And the refugee, it's done through the United Nations. We currently don't do asylum cases actually because we're just limited in our scope of representation. So we taking those so those are like some of the main ways people come. We do family, which is meaning that you need a family member who is a US citizen or a legal permanent resident, which means somebody that has a green card, to petition for you. So they have to request, they have to be the petitioner on your application for you to have a legal status in the US. And we also only work with clients that are currently already here in the US. So we're not bringing people over from overseas or another country. We're working with people that are already here. So our first step when somebody calls us is we want to first figure out, what do they need? Is it something that we can help them with? And if we think it is, we want to figure out their eligibility for that. So we do a screening, a legal screening for every client that calls. And we ask a series of questions about their immigration history, a lot of information about their immigration history. Like, when did you come? Do you have relatives that are US citizens? We collect information about any criminal history. Have you been a victim of a crime? We go through all types of information. And once we have that information, we can kind of see what process they might be eligible for in immigration. And then if we're able to take that case and they're eligible, we'll move forward with their petition. We will file the forms for them. Then we can represent them in their immigration interview if needed. And we walk through that process for whatever next step that they might need in their
I think
journey.
this is a good spot in the conversation to ask what life is like for an undocumented immigrant who's living, and we'll just say West Tennessee because this is where we are. First question is this: anyone who's come to you all for services, what's the longest that they've been here living as an undocumented immigrant that you've seen?
I think the longest that we've seen a client that we've been able to help is probably 28 years.
Wow. Okay.
And just to give you some context, is like, people are not wanting to be undocumented. People are not wanting to stay in this situation. There is a barrier to them being able to take that next step. So they aren't just hanging out for 20 years. It's a very poor quality of life. They have little access to any type of, they have no access to public benefits, but even to just resources in general. And you can be taken advantage of very easily in their situations. It's a very vulnerable population. So they are generally in this position because they don't have an avenue or a pathway that they're eligible to apply for. And so this is why this can be, somebody could be here for 28 years and then all of a sudden they're eligible because either their situation has changed, a family member is a US citizen, or something has changed in their circumstances that allows them a door that's opened for them to be able to apply for something with immigration.
Someone who is undocumented, obviously they're, if they've lived here 28 years, they're working. Now, I think there is and I think I learned this in our previous conversation, and I could be wrong, so correct me if I am. If they are working, do they have a code from the government, like a work code that they're given, or is this something different?
So it's not permission to work. So you don't have permission to work if you're undocumented. However, there is a expectation that you are going to have to find a way to survive. You have to be able to figure it out if you are going to stay here without a legal status. And so the government does give, well, the IRS gives ITIN numbers, which is it's an identification tax number. This number allows someone to be able to pay taxes that they would owe on money that they make. It doesn't give you the ability to work legally. However, billions of dollars are paid by undocumented immigrants per year that go into our economic system, and they do not receive any benefits back from that because they don't have valid social security numbers and they don't get that back in from the system because of their status. So there are, yes, I mean, in a way, they do have a system set up where they're able to pay taxes. And that's how that we have those numbers. And we know how much is being paid into the system from undocumented immigrants.
So once someone comes to you all and says, okay, I have a pathway, right? I have someone to, I forgot what words you used, not vouch for me, for lack of a better term. Once they start that process, how long does it take to get them full legal status, or does that just depend on the situation? Is everything different, or every situation different?
Yeah, everything is different. I would say it generally can be from 1 year. That's really quick in immigration to about 26 years right now. There's a wait list for about that long, depending on what country you're from and depending on who is petitioning for you. We do have wait list in immigration just because of a large backlog of how many people are applying. And those numbers are capped every single year by how many applications they're accepting and processing. So when it's capped and they meet that limit, it creates this backlog. So for some people, the wait is very, very, very long. And that can be really discouraging when you're telling a client are eligible, but there's not we would say a visa available for you right now because you have to wait, 25 years for that visa to become available for you to be eligible. So it really depends on the client's situation and where they're at in this process.
What countries have longer wait periods, and why do those countries have longer wait periods?
Mexico, the Philippines, and India and China, I think, all have the longest wait lines. And that's really because of obviously our history. We border Mexico. So you're going to have more people wanting to come from Mexico than you are, Norway or somewhere like Great Britain. So those countries don't have the large amount of backlog because you don't have as many people applying to come as you do from the countries that I just mentioned. So that is how these wait lists get longer just based on maybe that country's population, what's happening in that country. And that is what builds up. I mean, obviously geographical location, that's going to be a factor too. And so you build up these wait times based on a lot of different factors.
The majority of immigrants that you all have served in the last 4 years, are they coming from a specific geographical location mostly, or is it just from all over?
It is from all over. We've seen clients from over 30 countries at this point. We have, I would say recently, there's been a large amount of Central Americans that have come to West Tennessee. It can be pretty diverse. I would say currently arriving at the border, and then eventually making their way towards where we are is probably a large amount of Central Americans.
I'm sure. I mean, that's just because, there's so much unrest in that
Yes.
in that part of the world right now. So, and this is a general question, but would you say that most immigrants who are coming, and we'll just say from Central America right now, do they have an idea of what the reality is like in America for them once they get here, or do they have a fictionalized version of what someone's told them about America, and then they get here and they're like, wait a second, this isn't what I thought this was going to be?
They do not have a good idea of what it is like here. And they have been told a lot of promises. And also remember that there is an entire business of getting people across, like promising them that there's going to be a certain life here. People pay money to have someone help them get here from Central America. That in itself is a business that is taking advantage of incredibly vulnerable people, promising them something when they get here that really does not exist. And so they will set out on this journey, often by foot, to cross through all these countries to get here and have been promised a certain type of life, and then arrive. And as they try to settle in or find, a home, it's not what they thought it was. And that is really challenging and hard for a lot of our clients to accept. There's so many barriers, and it is not what they picture America to be from their home country. It just doesn't equal out once they get here what they were promised.
There was an article I read, and actually I think it was published today. It was on ABC News, and it was talking about the unaccompanied minors that have come across. And I know you guys deal with family stuff, but have you heard any of that, or how does a child get across unaccompanied, or is this just a situation of parents realizing how their situation is in their home country, so they just like for the betterment of their child, this is what they think they should do, or has that been blown out of proportion a little bit on the narrative scale?
No, I think that is definitely happening. I mean, we see unaccompanied minors. I would say that a lot of the children that are coming to the border, once they get to the border and they're alone, let's say they have no parent or adult with them, they are likely trying to reunite with a family member that's already in the US. So this is part of their journey, that they're trying to connect with a family member. Sometimes I know we have seen a child, or she was like a teenager whose both parents were killed, and she made her way to the border and trying to come to West Tennessee to be with a family member. We take on a lot of children's cases that have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both parents. And so oftentimes we'll see one parent that's not in their life, or maybe has passed away, or just not present, and then they're coming to live with their other parent. But sometimes, depending on how desperate that situation is, there is a parent in that country saying, go, because this is the only chance of survival that I see for you. And I realize that is really hard to picture from an American viewpoint, that a parent would be in that position to say that. But these are incredibly desperate situations where people feel like they have no choice, and that the only way of survival would be to send their child in hopes of some type of better life. And so, yeah.
The last conversation I did on this channel, right, this social media platform that we have, was with my old youth minister from like 30 years ago. And we had this conversation about faith and belief. And we sort of went off on a tangent about it's kind of the infiltration of politics into the church, and how that's kind of been an unholy marriage in some denominations and things like that. And I referenced this program through All Saints as something that sometimes gets overlooked, in how loud a lot of things can be, how loud a lot of narratives can be, socio-political narratives, how they're sort of immersing themselves sometimes in certain groups of Christians. And I told him, I was like, we have a church here that seems to be, every time I turn around, they're doing the good work of basically what Jesus did. And this is another example. And I know that you guys are a nonprofit and you're sort of under that umbrella. You're not the church, but you're All Saints Immigration Services. And so how, obviously there's not a Christian bend to this, because you're providing a service, but how much of that does go, when in service you're providing, like, this is the real work that we need to be doing to help vulnerable people?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, on a personal level, yes. I mean, this is bringing life into somebody else's life that has mostly in desperate situations, and changing that. So when we talk about, the kingdom of heaven and being a part of what God's doing, it has to be physical, right? Like, it's somebody else's space in life that you would want to better, want to give them resources, want to give them a better life. And so I think it's, incredibly motivating for whatever no matter what their reasons are for coming here or how they got here, whatever that story is. The fact is that another human is sitting in front of you and is in need. And so those barriers are breaking down. The questions, I don't have to sit there and question, do you deserve this service that I'm providing for you? That is not the question that we ask. We are providing the service because they're deserving of it. I would say that's definitely formed by my faith. And I know even with my coworkers as well that, and a lot of our clients too, I mean, they're also have these own spiritual stories and beliefs of why they came here. Many of them have their own spiritual stories of God with them through walking through the desert, God with them through these steps that maybe we're also not thinking about when we consider their own client spiritual journey in this. So I think that is, I mean, it's incredibly informative for me. Starting this organization, that was very formative. And yeah, I think that does play a part in like why we do a lot of what we do, and wherever that client is on that path, it varies. But
Since you guys opened in 2020, which man, what a time to open, like November of 2020.
I know, I know.
Right. And I think if I'm remembering correctly, that's when we, at least in West Tennessee, had like a re-uptick in COVID cases around that time before the vaccine came out. And so, like, it had to have been challenging. I mean, obviously, in a perfect situation, something like this probably would have been challenging to get going, but you add COVID onto that, like, goodness. But since that time, like, have your services grown? And what I mean by that, are you seeing more and more people now that word's kind of gotten out about what you guys provide?
Yes, so much. I mean, we haven't done a lot of advertising because we just haven't needed to. A lot of it's been word of mouth. And obviously, starting as a new organization, we wanted to be slow at what we were doing because it was such a big learning curve. And so we were kind of happy about that where we were. However, at this point, I mean, I think last year we did about 100 legal screenings, and I think in July we were already at 130 legal screenings. So we are way outpacing even what we've done last year. And yeah, it's just continuing. I mean, this is such a huge need. This is not going to stop. I mean, the migration of people is never going to stop. So, this is just going to be an issue. And I think there's always going to be a need for it. And it is continuing to grow as people find out more about what we do. And there's just not access to it really outside of Nashville and Memphis.
Well, that's what I was going to ask too. Like, you guys are the only, I guess, and sometimes I don't see Jackson as rural West Tennessee, but it really is. I mean, Memphis and Nashville are the big cities, and we're I guess, the biggest one in between them. But we're a hub for a lot of counties. Now, that's another question. I'm assuming that people are coming from other counties for your services as well. It's not just Madison County, right?
Right, right. We serve like all 20 counties, except when we don't do Nashville and Memphis. And so, yeah, they're coming from all of West Tennessee. Yeah, it's a lot of counties.
So is there one, and obviously no names or anything, but is there a story that sticks out to you from beginning to end where this person came for support from y'all or for your services, and then you saw it all the way through to the end, and now they are a documented best citizen?
Okay, let me think of let's see. We have, well, I'll share one that's almost in that process. But she has a really long wait. One of our clients I mentioned earlier the client that has been here for like 28 years. We have seen he is on his pathway to citizenship. He has a few more years left, but is really close. What we began filing in 2020, 2021, and even 2022, because immigration takes so long, these processes are so long, we are now seeing a lot of the fruits of that. And so one of those is we filed, I think maybe in 2022, a case of a woman who had been a victim of crime. I haven't really touched on those cases yet, but we take cases of humanitarian cases of people who have been victims of crime or domestic violence or witnessed a crime. And she had been assaulted at her place of employment and was eligible for a pathway to get a visa that will lead to a green card, and then later can apply for citizenship. And so part of that process, it's actually about a 10-year wait. However, when we applied, she was going to get her work permit that would allow her to work and get a driver's license and a social security about at the halfway mark. And for whatever reason, immigration processed that quickly. And we got that at about the 1.5 year mark. And so we were able to call her and say, yeah, no, we told you 4 years, but hey, your work permit came in today. So it was just, we've been able to see that a lot this year, but having somebody come in and be able to like hand them an ID, it's just incredibly life changing for somebody. Like most of them, I'm like, moving my mouth and talking, and I can tell they are not hearing anything I'm saying because they're like crying or hugging me or just like they just have no words. They have no words. And so she still has a long way to go. But I think what she had told us was, but now I can go get a job that's not basically going to take advantage of her at that point, that she can now go to get a job and say, hey, this is my legal permission to be able to work. And so yeah, it's really exciting to start to see a lot of those cases being processed.
I think that really speaks to the vulnerabilities that people don't seem to have an awareness of, that especially undocumented immigrants have to face here. They're not part of the system, so to speak. They don't have any protections necessarily. I'm sure that they're always under fear or threat of something happening too, with the way that the political climate is as well, or being found out, or, and again, this is all conjecture on my part. I'm just thinking from the outside what someone must feel like if they're in that situation. You mentioned, and I should have asked this earlier, what is the process of someone who is undocumented? What's the first thing they get when they come to you? Is it a visa or a green card? Like, what is that sort of line that they have to follow to get full citizenship?
So generally it would be, depending on what process they're applying for, it could be they first get a visa. That visa will allow them to apply for a green card, and then they have a green card for 5 years, and then they can apply for citizenship. Sometimes, for example, if you're married to a US citizen, you can apply directly for a green card, and then you can apply for citizenship after that. So yeah, it's on a scale of like undocumented to visa to green card to citizenship is the ultimate goal. But to get to the end, that's years. That's years.
And you mentioned, and you just shared this story, and I think you mentioned a previous conversation we had in the spring, where another pathway is if you are victimized. Is that correct? And
Mm-hmm.
so if you're a victim of a crime and you're undocumented, that can put you on a pathway?
Yes. So Congress put in place, because we're family based, most people need a relative to petition for them. If you don't have that relative, you really don't qualify for anything. However, was happening is you would have people that had either witnessed a crime or they were the victim of crime, and they were afraid to report those to local police. And in order to help people and have safer communities, they put into effect this law that if you will work with local police and report these crimes, you can be eligible based on being a victim. It's not guaranteed, but your eligibility can be opened up the door to apply for a visa that will then allow you to change and adjust your status in the future to get a green card. It's only certain qualifying crimes. It's not every crime, but we will help our clients make sure that they've worked with local police, that they've reported this crime. And then if they're eligible, we'll take on that case. It can also be victims of domestic violence. You often will see a spouse that's a US citizen and they married somebody that's undocumented, but they use their US citizenship as a way to abuse the undocumented immigrant. So they'll say, no, I'm not going to petition for you, or we'll keep that person undocumented as a way of control. And so we see that often too, where they're going to say, no, I'm not petitioning for you. And they kind of use that against them. Yeah, a lot of different scenarios. So this is an avenue, a humanitarian way that they do not need a relative. They self-petition in these instances. And so we help them self-petition, and that's when they can qualify. And it's the same with our children's cases. We take on those fall in the same category, where if they've been abused, abandoned, or neglected, they self-petition instead of needing a relative to petition for them. They qualify just on the fact of that abuse and being a minor child.
Before we sort of transition into the more general conversation about immigration and the connotation, even that word has when it's said out loud. Depending on who you are, will receive that word, and it will cause a vastly different response in two different people depending on their viewpoints. But can you sum up? I mean, you've done like an excellent job of getting into the details of what this whole process is like, and it's so much more nuanced than I think anyone would ever even imagine who's never like been in it like you have. But can you like briefly sum up the difference in quality of life of someone who is undocumented or even on a pathway to citizenship, and then someone who has finally reached that full citizenship as a United States citizen? Like how different are those lives comparatively speaking?
I would say, I mean, it's totally opposite. It's 100% different. So many of the things that you benefit from as U.S. citizen are they're not eligible for. For example, just to kind of name some of the things that when you live undocumented is you don't, obviously in Tennessee you can't get a driver's license. You don't have social security number. You cannot work legally. You can't qualify for any public benefits. You have to pay out of state college tuition if you want to go to college. Health insurance, you don't qualify for health insurance. And even, smaller services, it's very hard to get. It's challenging to open a bank account. It's not impossible, but it can be challenging because it's confusing when somebody doesn't have a valid ID. And even those small things are hindrances to doing the basic things that you need to do in your day-to-day life with your family, with your kids. Some of those, it's just so complicated to do that. And so those are some of the barriers that are slowly through the immigration process becoming a legal permanent resident. You have a little bit more, but until you fully become a U.S. citizen, a lot of those benefits don't come until you have been a legal permanent resident for a certain amount of time or you become a US citizen. So it's very limiting, and there's just so many lack of resources. I mean, you can go to the emergency room. You're not going to be denied emergency care, but it can be really complicated getting like into a clinic, or definitely not getting health insurance or any type of program like that.
So there is, and this is where we can kind of shift into more of a broader conversation about immigration and the way that it's being presented and has been presented for a long time. I mean, this isn't anything new. It just seems to ramp up around election years, especially presidential election years. And there is a narrative that immigrants who are coming into America are not vulnerable. In fact, it's the opposite. It's like they are the ones who are victimizing U.S. citizens who are already here. There are those narratives out there, and they're very loud, and they're being pushed very aggressively. As someone who literally works with immigrants and you are part of the process, you understand how complicated it can be. What are some of the sort of these larger narratives that are out there right now that you hear them, and maybe you don't pay attention. Maybe I need to be more like that. You hear them and you think that couldn't be further from the truth. Like that's not reality at all. Like, are there things that stick out to you that you hear that maybe on the news or you hear people say and you're like, that's not in this world at all?
Yeah, I definitely. So, I mean, I would say the majority of the people that are even currently and even in the past, honestly, coming to the border, they're coming to the border because they want to do this correctly, and their families. There has been a time in our immigration history that I think a lot of people that were coming were like men who wanted to work in some type of agriculture, who are providing for their family and sending money back home. It has drastically shifted. And that's who we see too. We see families. We see children who were brought here by their parents by no choice of their own. We see, people who have been here decades, people who are trying to reunify with their family, people who have U.S. citizen children, or everybody in their family literally has a different legal status. So they're just trying to all get on the same page to have some type of family stability. And sometimes the myth, a lot of things like, there's so many myths out there, criminals, that everybody's a criminal, or these things that the reality is a criminal, a drug trafficker is not trying to come to our office and get papers and do it the right way. They don't care about that. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, that there are bad people that come into the U.S. Of course, there is, but it is a very, very small percentage. And they are not trying to come to the border and talk to an immigration official, tell them why they should be let in. And they're definitely not coming to our office to be processed in that way. And so it is always feels like a step back when there is a news story of like somebody, an immigrant that's done something horrible. If you really look into the statistics, though, about who is committing crimes, the immigrant population, it's incredibly low. It's incredibly low compared to US citizens. And this is also true with drug trafficking. US citizens are drug trafficking. I'm not saying that immigrants have never done that and aren't doing that, but there are organized systems, and these families that we're seeing and helping are not part of those systems. They are not. And so we just need to separate what we're hearing.
It's so hard to do. Now, here's my question, and this is, I think about this a lot. I teach at a local high school, and we have our immigrant population has grown in the last few years, and I wonder sometimes if they're aware of these narratives that are out there. The people that you help, are they aware that these narratives are out there? Do they feel that, I don't want to say fear, but that pressure, or do they hear those things that are out there as I don't know if it's stereotypes the right word, but linking immigrants to these things that you just mentioned, crime, drugs, things like that?
Really good question. And I'm really answering this from my own perspective because I'm not totally sure, but my guess is no. Mm-hmm. The reason why I say this is because, most of our clients are truly in a survival mode. They are not staying up to date on politics and how they're really being viewed. They just are on an entirely different level of making it one day at a time. And so I don't think that they really are truly aware of the narrative. If they have been here for decades, yes, they are. Just to give you an example of how it slowly shifts for immigrants as they're here over time, I had met with a family who had arrived from recently. They had recently arrived to the country. They had been bombed. Their house had been bombed by a neighboring country, and they came to the US because they knew nowhere else to go. They lost everything, and they lost all of their extended family except for their core group, kids and parents. They came and met with us and were just like so relieved to be in America. Their idea of America was, finally, we have come, we have hope, we have lost everything we have. We are at this place and we are ready for the American dream. They were just at an all-time high, like just wanting to be a part of the community, wanting to learn English, ready. They were so ready to move forward. But the reality is they have no idea of all the barriers that it is going to take to cross to get to that point. And I met with them about 6 months later from this, and they were in a completely different, that is not what they were saying. They were in a completely different position. It varies with people. I think that they arrive hopeful. It's like the Ellis Island dream, come, all those who yearn to build this life. And then they get here and realize that is not what is in front of them. And so I think the narratives that we see play out are a lot. It's on the other side. It's on the people who aren't immigrants that are creating these narratives of the other. And sometimes I don't know that they're fully aware of that, but they are the ones affected by it. Absolutely affected by the conversation. They're the ones that are being talked about, decisions are made about, but they're not a part of that conversation.
Which is literally the definition of vulnerability. I mean, that's what that is.
Absolutely.
Like if you have decisions being made for you that you don't have a say in, and you just have to accept whatever that is. And those narratives that are out there and the way that people respond to those narratives, does that impact how, not how you do your job? Does it make it any more difficult for y'all to do what you do? Or is it just pretty much like you're going by the law, this is just what it is? I know legislation can change and that might affect how you do your job.
It does make it difficult. I would say, for the client example I just mentioned, who is incredibly hopeful. They are here ready to contribute and assimilate and be a part of this country in every way. I am not going to be stepping in to say, well, actually, it's not going to be like that for you. I'm mostly going to sit with them in that space, listen to their stories, empathize with them, the sadness that brought him here. This was not their first choice. They didn't want this. They want to be in their home country. They want to be with their family. They want to be speaking their language. This is most people. And I would say our clients, we work with a specific client. I'm not talking about every immigrant. We work with low income immigrants who are vulnerable, who have a lot of trauma, who know very little income level. So this is certain type of the immigrant population. I realize this is not everyone. And not all of our clients are undocumented. Some of them have green cards or different statuses. Lost my train of thought. But what we're wanting to see in that is that they will be able to move to the next stage in that process. And then I got to get back to my train of thought. I was like right in the middle of my sentence.
Well, that's okay. Do you mean I can wait for it to keep going? I can keep going. I think that's what this boils down to oftentimes is that probably, and I think I remember you saying this in our previous conversation, if they had their preference, they would rather be in their home country and their home country be a place where they could raise their family in a way that's safe and they could, and all that. Like, of course that would be, but I think in the narrative that's out there, and I keep saying the narrative, but the way that's presented is that a lot of people who are coming over here are like, well, I just got to get to America because then I can make a lot of money or my life's going to be, this, or this. And maybe that is the case for some, but I truly believe that if it were me, I would want to live my best life in the place where my parents live theirs and my grandparents live theirs and where, my culture and my traditions are celebrated and not have to go somewhere thousands of miles away to do.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I've never had a client tell me this was like their dream. The situation they're in, coming here, this was like their last option to do. It took a tremendous amount. I mean, and honestly, like most people don't make it to this point. I mean, they have already, when we're talking about Central and South America, even like Africa, things that are happening, large percentage of their populations are dying, whether war, starvation. This is really a last option for a lot of people. And so we see their stories when they come to us. And I realized what your question was, which I was trying to think of, was like, how do you deal with telling these clients like these situations? And especially when they don't have a pathway forward, because they do come here thinking, okay, I'm ready. I want to start this process. But part of I would even say it's sometimes even a gift in a weird way to be able to explain to a client their legal situation, even if they don't have a pathway forward, because what we're doing is empowering them with information and education that they did not have before. We don't want them to go out and pay somebody else that says, yeah, you're eligible for a green card, give me $10,000, when they're not eligible for a green card. Because what happens is they start a cycle because they're so vulnerable. They continue to be taken advantage of. And it just continues. And so once we can sit down and meet with them and then say, this is why you don't have a legal pathway forward. This is what you could do. This is what maybe your rights are. Maybe something will change in your situation or the law. But informing them of that, also empowering them and giving them the resources they need to not be taken advantage of by somebody else that is going to promise them some type of citizenship or green card or something when they can't get that.
You mentioned something, and then this will probably be the last question as we're coming up on an hour, but you mentioned something about like unless something changes with the law. Immigration law is something that's talked about a lot, and it seems to be really complex. How much does it change? Like even slightly? Like is it something that changes pretty frequently?
So I don't know why I'm hesitant. And the overarching, no, we have not had immigration reform in decades. However, small changes are made. A president has the power to not change the law. They cannot change immigration law. That's going to have to go through Congress, which is what we do hope changes, that there's some type of reform. However, if they want to put in an executive order, that does change the situation, but it's generally temporarily. And I say that because it's, litigation, and there's lawsuits put and it closes down, or it's for a certain amount of time, and then so that's very temporary, and it only affects a small amount of people each
Okay.
time. So yes, it does change. It might open the door, and constantly staying up on immigration law is like so important for this job. Know how to advise your clients in the best way possible and see what they are eligible for. But just immigration law overall, it's a slow, that it has not been updated in a very long time.
And not to put you on the spot, but the thing I want to close out with is I like politics. Well, I don't like politics. I used to follow it a lot, and really just in the last 6 months, I've just felt so burned out on a lot of the way it's being communicated, both sides. Like, it's not just one side or the other. I know where I lean. I know what my personal values are. And regardless of all the things that are going back and forth, that's probably not going to change. Like, I know who I am, and I know the things that I value. That being said, I am so much more interested in truth and what the reality of situations are more than I am who's right or who's wrong. So if you were to sit down with someone who thinks that immigrants are coming here to take our jobs, to, sell our kids drugs, basically all of these things that we just have been kind of batting back and forth for the last 15 minutes, like, if you got the chance to sit down and talk to them face to face, because I think that's kind of how people shift their views on stuff, is through actual just conversation. Like, what would you tell them? As in, like, if you just had like a few minutes to sit down and say, hey, that's just not right. Like, here's the reality. What is the reality of most of the immigrants that you all serve through your program?
That I think about that question a lot. I try to avoid those like conversations with people who are like not willing to even listen.
But what
If
if they
they
were? What if they
were,
were willing to listen?
I think just challenging them to explore what their understanding of immigration is and why people migrate. I think humanizing it, I think you have to bring that to the table to be able to change. I mean, I could throw out so many statistics, but I'm not sure that's really going to persuade anybody's opinion. And honestly, I don't even know how much a conversation will. I think it's important to bring to the table that. But when you can bring somebody who's experienced that themselves as an immigrant, it can be even more powerful. And that's sometimes challenging for us to do because of our clients and them not being able to share or want to share those stories. But I think like having somebody realize, have you ever thought about your family being in this situation? Have you ever considered what you would do if this is how your government was in that home country, or you didn't have food to eat anymore, or your business was taken away, or your home blown up by a bomb? Like, these are real situations that are happening all over the world, and people's lives are affected by those, and everybody wants safety. And they are going to continue to migrate throughout the whole world, not just the USA. Europe is seeing these same problems in order to find safety. It is human nature to do that out of survival. And so look on those people with compassion, listen to their stories and believe them. Like, believe that their stories and what they're saying are true, and like that actually happened to them, and that is their own experience that they're bringing to you. I think just sitting and believing somebody, even that can be really hard for people. I think to say, acknowledge, like, I hear your story and I believe you. And that can be the starting place for empathy.
Yeah.
And that can what lead to maybe a change in your own personal belief, is if you can have empathy in that person and their situation and the shoes that they're in.
I think that you hit the nail on the head, and I think that's the thing it's probably just missing and has been fading like rapidly, is just empathy, or even understanding for other people, regardless of whatever socio-political group you find yourself a part of. Finding a human story and hearing that and believing it. And that's important. Like you said, I never really thought about that, because I think we do hear these things all the time, but we're so myopically focused on what we think is right that it just kind of bounces off that shell and we don't believe it. Like, we can hear it, but we just don't believe it. So It's actually, that's really good. I never thought about that before. Stacey, thank you so much for sitting down and telling this story. And I know that you're sort of telling the story of your services and what you've seen firsthand from other people, but I think this is valuable too, because I think people need to hear that this is real life in West Tennessee. This isn't just happening in South Texas. Like what I mean is immigration is around, it's everywhere, and they're human beings who are extremely vulnerable, and they are oftentimes they are not cast in that light.
Mhm.
They are cast in a different light, and it's unfair, and I do think it's inhumane. So thank you for bringing some humanity to this.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.